Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Conversations. I'm Professor Muqtadar Khan, your host, and today with us we have a very distinguished guest, Senator Ghazala Hashmi, who is the first women Muslim senator of the state of Virginia. She represents the 10th district. She's also a PhD in English literature from Emory University, and before entering politics, she was heavily engaged in the educational system uh, in Virginia. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
So, your immediate reaction, are you shocked by the loss of Terry MacAuliffe?
I can't say that I'm shocked. I think we had some indication that this was going to be a very, very tight race and that we were going to see large turnout among the Republican base. So I'm not shocked, but I am incredibly disappointed. I think that this is a loss for us, not just in Virginia, but it is a loss for us throughout the country because it sends some signals about where we might possibly be headed in terms of the electoral turnout that we saw in Virginia, people who are energized and the reasons why they're energized. So that has been incredibly disappointing.
I was looking at the comparisons of the people who voted in 2020 and this. The indications are that Virginia has suddenly become more white and more older. A lot of young people didn't show up as they did not show up in 2010. But the voter turnout is phenomenal, more than 53% or 52%. Uh, what is driving such a tremendous voter turnout?
Well, you're right, we had a tremendous voter turnout, both among the Democrats as well as the Republicans. And I think that's because in Virginia in particular, we have elections every year, and we have gotten accustomed to the fact that people need to vote and that every election is the most critical election that's in front of us, and that every election is laying the foundation for the next year's election. And so there is a rhythm, you might say, in Virginia in terms of people knowing that they need to vote. This year in particular, I think we saw a great deal of energy that was a reaction on the right in response to what we've been through with the COVID crisis, manufactured indignation around issues in education, and then a motivation to respond to the victory of Joe Biden. So we had a kind of a synthesis of many different factors playing a role in why the Republican majority turned out in this particular election. But Democrats were also very engaged. There was a narrative going around that Democrats were going to sit out this election, and that simply wasn't the case. We had solid turnout among the Democratic base as well.
The MacAuliffe got the highest number of votes that any Democratic candidate for governor in Virginia ever got. So the issues, according to various polls going into the elections, were basically number one, economy, number two, COVID, number three, education. So if people did vote according to these priorities, why are Virginians unhappy with what is happening in the country? This seems more like a no to what Biden and the Democrats are offering rather than whatever Glenn Youngkin was willing to offer.
It is something of a surprise in terms of what voters are going to gravitate to, what issues are going to compel them in particular. Virginia's economy is strong. Virginia's economy is doing very, very well. And this is under Democratic leadership of the past several years. We've had a booming economy. Virginia has been named 2 years running as the best place for business. And we have the capacity to do a lot of good things. We have already allocated the ARPA funding towards issues that Virginians wanted to see funded. We have placed almost $800,000 towards broadband expansion, making sure that all households will be connected by 2024. Healthcare options have increased for so many Virginians as a result of Medicaid expansion. So we've done excellent work. And Democrats have funded education. 10 years ago, under Republican control, the significant funding was pulled from our K-12 system, as well as from higher education. We've worked really hard to restore that level of education funding, to pay teachers better, to increase teacher pay, to make sure that students have opportunities for federal financial aid, state financial aid in Virginia. So we've been focusing a lot on education. That's the education issue that voters seem to have missed. And then there's the manufactured indignation around the narrative around critical race theory, around issues of the lack of parental involvement in schools. All of that is manufactured. It's simply not true. And if one thing we can say as a self-criticism is that we really miss the opportunity to tell the real story of education, all the good stuff that's happening in Virginia's systems. And that's terribly tragic, because Virginians need to be proud of what we've been able to do in our education system.
I've been listening to commentators on CNN and MSNBC, and not in a very concealed or stealth fashion. They're saying basically that Youngkin was using racist dog whistles, talking about CRT, which is actually not taught in Virginia schools, talking about critical race theory repeatedly, arguing that under Democrats, schools will exclude parents from essentially parenting. But to me, what is worrying is if we buy the argument that this manufactured indignation has racist overtones to it, then it also tells me that majority of voters in Virginia are racist, or at least susceptible to racist dog whistles. And that is a bit scary for Democrats to come out and say that Republicans are winning because the electorate responds to racist dog whistles. As someone who has been in education, what do you think about this issue itself?
It's very disturbing. I've been talking particularly to a lot of young folks who are of Hispanic background or Asian background, and what's really disturbing to them is this idea that racism is so latent and so much a part of the society that people could respond to these kinds of flagrant dog whistles that we heard throughout the Youngkin campaign. But sadly, we're inheriting a not just Virginia, but this whole country. We're inheriting the results of 4 years of the Trump administration, an administration that thrived on these kinds of demonization, racist stereotypes, the scapegoating of minority communities. And it's become acceptable, and it's become visible in ways that it hasn't been in many decades. And so people are able to respond to these racist dog whistles, but they're also seeing that it's possible to turn them around and pretend that it's an act of patriotism, and that it's perfectly acceptable, when in fact we know it's not acceptable, and we know what the real issues are. I have a good friend who was running for House of Delegate seat in Chesterfield County, which is a part of my district as well, and which is where I live. And it's caught on video on election day yesterday. A man came storming up to her and hurled an open racial slur without any pause. And the fact that he could speak to a woman and to a candidate for office in this very offensive way, and feel like there was no response to that he could do it with ease, I think it's a sign of where we are, and it's very, very disturbing for many of us.
One of the things that people are suggesting is that it is quite possible that voters in Virginia are reacting to the progressive side of the Democratic Party. They are reacting to the accusations that MacAuliffe tried to make this campaign national, and therefore the Virginian voters reacted nationally. They are paranoid about this call for defunding police, the emphasis on structural racism. Not only that, but some of the foreign policy failures, such as rather incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, and now the inability of the Democrats to get their agenda passed in the Congress. All of this seems to be conveying to people that perhaps we're not going in the right direction. I was looking at a recent poll where 71% of the people in the country feel that the country is going in the wrong direction. Do you think that these national indicators have somehow played into Virginia politics?
I've heard that as well, but I really didn't hear that from voters. I didn't hear it in conversations with neighbors or with constituents. I think the main focus for most Virginians is about issues that are very local, issues that matter to them. And most of my constituents really want to see us come out of COVID, want our small businesses to recover, want our schools to be fully back, and the children to get the support that they need. Those were the issues that I've been hearing about. Now, folks who were angry about school closures, about vaccine mandates, about the kind of direction, as you say, that they think we're going in. Those voters too were very localized. We saw this with our local school boards meetings, our local county supervisor and city council meetings, people angry very much about what's happening in their own school systems. And so those were the issues. But, I want to push back on some of the narrative about so-called defunding the police. Virginian Democrats actually increased pay raise for Virginia State Police as well as for local police departments. And so we have never been speaking about defunding the police, and in fact have really supported expanding opportunities for law enforcement, increased training, and so forth. And when we're talking about defunding, really it's Glenn Youngkin who wants to defund public schools. That's what we need to be focused on. The plan that he has proposed is to privatize public education, to take public tax dollars and direct them to private schools. And that ought to be the headline. Education and public schools are at the heart of every community. We want to ensure that we have quality public education. And Youngkin ran on a platform of defunding public education.
I mean, he's also talking of charter schools, right? 20 new charter schools is one of his plans. Is this election a bellwether? So, for example, I just heard that Murphy in New Jersey has retained his position. So at least Democrats have held on to the governorship in New Jersey. But the closeness of the election is kind of sending jitters to the Democratic Party. At least a lot of analysts seem to be worried that is this a kind of a bellwether for 2022 elections? Is this new model that Glenn Youngkin is presenting, a very subtle, he's a contrast from Donald Trump, who was so crass, but this man is much more suave, sophisticated, no political baggage because he had no political history. So are you worried about 2022?
There's a lot going on as we lead up to 2022. First of all, every state is engaged in the redistricting process. I'm here at the National Conference for State Legislators, and That's all anyone is talking about is redistricting and how it's taking place in their states and what the results are going to be. So redistricting is going to decide many of our state races as well as congressional races. And things change rapidly with this news cycle. I think people want to say that Virginia is a bellwether, and in many ways it might be. But I think overall, the election of Glenn Youngkin is not going to be a signal that Democrats have relinquished the efforts and the progress that they've made. Quite the reverse. I think we have a very strong story to tell in Virginia, and we need to continue to share that story. These past 2 years, when Democrats held office in Virginia, both chambers as well as the governor's seat, we made tremendous progress in protecting voting rights and securing women's reproductive health issues, in expanding access to education, gun control, gun safety measures that were necessary, criminal justice reform. We abolished the death penalty. We did so much in 2 sessions. And that's the remarkable story. And we were really reflecting Virginians' values. Virginians elected the majority of us. This is how we got to office. I was elected in 2019, and I ran on a platform of these issues. And this is what Virginians have responded to. And I think we see this around the country. Most Americans want these same ideals, want us to make sure that we are protecting our education, that we are giving healthcare access, that we are protecting the rights of women and minority communities. These are the issues that resonate with most voters, and we just need to keep telling those stories.
You make a very interesting point. I mean, your win itself is an indication that at least in the 10th district, people are open and are not susceptible to dog whistles, which are of racist nature. But even those who voted for President Obama in some of the counties in Virginia, and then later voted for Biden, have now turned around and voted for Youngkin, which is kind of surprising to see how there has been this kind of a swing in his direction. So people seem to be worried that should we take this as some kind of a referendum on the Biden agenda? Or the Democratic progressive agenda nationally, or the alternative would be what has spooked the voters, right? Something has spooked them. And so, they voted for Obama, they voted for Biden, and then they voted for somebody else.
I don't think it's a referendum. The Biden administration is still very young, and the Biden administration has faced so many unique challenges, really, that no other presidency has faced. And I think we've been doing quite well emerging from the pandemic, making sure that Americans, Virginians are vaccinated. So there's been tremendous progress. If anything is spooking certain categories of voters, it is the misinformation and the news cycle and the heavy assault of very coordinated efforts to divert individuals' attentions into areas that really are not legitimate. And that's the challenge in front of us. It's a challenge that no other generation has ever had, this rapid news cycle, this constant flow through social media of misinformation. And it's quite difficult it's overwhelming to constantly be rebutting issues that simply don't exist. It's like fighting a ghost. How do you fight against something that is not real? And how do you convince people that it's not real?
What lessons can Democrats draw from this election going forward for the next year and a half, or we have less than a year, about exactly a year roughly, to 2022 November. So what lessons can Democrats draw from this election? What to do, what not to do?
I think we shouldn't shy away from the issues that really resonate with the people who vote for us and who are invested in the issues that matter. Most of the people that I talk to, most Americans, I think, are very concerned about the divisions that are in this country. Most want to see us create a platform that is built on compassion, on strengthening communities, on making sure that families and children are safe. We live in the wealthiest country and we have the capacity to really move people out of poverty, to give them opportunities to succeed. And most of the folks that I talk to want to see an America as well as a Virginia that reflects these kinds of core, compassionate, democratic values. I think we need to talk about that. We need to outline our principles. We need to connect directly to what folks are feeling and what kind of country they want to see. And the more we're able to do that, rather than shy away from it or be afraid to talk about these kinds of concerns, I think we'll be much more successful. Don't be afraid. I keep telling folks around me to talk about equity. Don't be afraid to talk about social justice. Don't be afraid to talk about compassionate values that address the needs of minority communities. The more people hear this message, the more responsive they are. And that's the kind of government most people do want to see. And I think we have to have those kinds of honest, forthright campaigns.
You have been an inspiration to a lot of people. I have been talking to some young Muslims in Chicago and other places who are running for office for Congress and other places, and many of them mention you specifically and say that your win was quite inspirational for them. So I want to thank you very much, and thank you very much for talking to me. It is troubling that Virginia now some people think is purple. I was hoping that in 2018 or 2020, Texas would go blue, but Virginia, which has been blue since 2009, isn't it? GOP has not won any statewide election since 2009, has temporarily gone red. But I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for talking to me. I hope to come back to you again and again.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to speak to you.